Friends, let's talk about how your pet's diet is one of the most important things determining the quality and health of your pet's skin. So, if your pet has allergic skin disease, if they have ear infections, chronic ear infections, scooting, rashes, red skin, um, flare ups in spring and fall, reactions to things that they eat. This all can look like just a skin problem, but it really is quite deeper than that. It's more than just a skin problem. So what seems like all of a sudden your pet has an acute or a sudden allergic reaction actually has been smoldering underneath in them for months or even years by the time you see it show up in the skin. So the skin is actually a messenger. So if we only treat the surface of the skin, we're ignoring a root cause. And we're going to talk about that root cause today. And the root cause means that we're looking for the underlying imbalances in the body that are leading to the inflammation that shows up on the skin. And so we talk about a terrain or the internal milieu. So what's going on inside the body, in the immune system, in the nervous system, in the digestive system, in the brain. There are all kinds of things going on in the body that influence what happens on the skin. So let's talk about what inflammation is. So what I mean by inflammation is you may see redness on the skin or rashes, which are inflammation. But inflammation in itself is not bad because inflammation is a reaction from the body to something and it's trying to protect the body. And the inflammation is trying to get rid of whatever it is that's bothering the body. But a chronically inflamed immune system becomes reactive. So when inflammation is excessive or constant, you get an overactive immune response. So if you think about the immune system, so our body protects itself. And the skin is a barrier, but so is the gut. The gut or the intestines, the lining of the intestines, the lining of the stomach is an extension of the skin. So it's actually a barrier to the inside of the body. And interestingly, the immune system, about 70 to 80% of the immune system is in the gut. So in the Peyer's patches, underneath the lining of the intestines lies these pockets of the immune system. And the immune system does so much in the gut. And the microbiome is part of the immune system. And the microbiome does things like makes vitamins and nutrients and makes hormones and makes neurotransmitters. So there's all kinds of things that are made in the intestines. And that's why it's so important to the body. And it's important to what's going on the surface of the skin, because the surface of the skin is just a surface problem. We need to look deeper. And when we understand what's going on at a deeper level, primarily in the gut, is what we're going to talk about today, then that kind of makes sense on how we approach skin problems, not just by putting a Band-Aid on the skin problem, like antibiotics for a rash or Apoquel for itching. We actually have to look deeper and take care of those underlying disharmonies. So when we have inflammation in the intestines, in the gut, it affects the immune system because 70 to 80% of the immune system is in the gut. So we have this immune derangement. We have not only a overactive immune system, but we have a suppressed immune system at the same time. So we have a deranged immune system that's just overreacting on the skin and can't function properly inside the body. And so then we get these weird skin symptoms that seem to come out of nowhere. So we have these repeated flare-ups, and it's just telling us that there's something deeper going on and we need to look deeper. So let's talk about food. So because the gut is such an important part of the immune system that affects the skin, so it affects your pets, allergic skin disease, or is the cause of your pet's allergic skin disease. We have to talk about food, because if we're going to talk about gut problems, so intestines and stomach, that logically leads us to talk about diet. And the same goes for people. So all the things that I'm going to say apply to people too. So think, if you think about that, if you're a healthy eater, we have to think about that for our pets too. So with highly processed food like kibble and canned, those products are manufactured with high heat and pressure. So the products that they put in the kibble and canned food are mixed in a big vat. They're heated at high temperatures. There's a lot of carbohydrates and sugars in there, and they are then extruded or pushed through little molds and then dried at high temperatures again. And what happens is, with the high temperatures, you get oxidation. So the high temperatures will cause the production of advanced glycation end products, or AGEs. And these are chemicals formed from the high temperature cooking that increases the free radicals or the oxidative stress in the body. And normally, there is normal oxidative or free radicals or advanced glycation end products in metabolism. So a small amount is normal. But when we have a large amount every day from eating the same inflammatory food every day, that overrides the body's ability to clear those free radicals, and that results in oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is what causes inflammation or suppressed immune system, or cells that are just not functioning properly. The other thing that we see is with the high carbohydrates that are used in kibble and canned food, and basically they use those because carbohydrates are needed to form the shapes of the kibble or the loaf and the thickness of the canned food. So we have a lot of simple carbohydrates, and dogs and cats were just not meant to be eating those. Biologically, they have developed their immune, or their gut is able to process protein and fat, and carbohydrates is not something that they have biologically needed. So we're adding all these carbohydrates into them by feeding kibble and canned foods, and the simple carbohydrates turn to sugar. So we have these spikes in their sugar. So their glucose spikes throughout the day, just like people that are eating a lot of carbs. And when your sugar spikes, that causes a lot of inflammation and internal stress in the body, and also leads to the oxidative stress that we're talking about with the advanced glycation end products and the free radicals. The other weird thing that happens is high heat cooking of starchy foods like your carbohydrates. One of the byproducts of that is acrylamide, and acrylamide doesn't show up on the label because it's a byproduct of the cooking. It's not something they actually add in. But this byproduct, acrylamide, it has been linked to cancer, so it is a carcinogen. Great, huh? So, we have to think about diet, and we have to understand that feeding an inflammatory diet, which is our kibble and canned food, our high heat processed foods, is something that will just keep the cycle going if we continue. So the key message here is we need to reduce the inflammatory load of our pets. And the primary way to do that, the way that we have the most control, is with their diet. So we can control that. So the difference between whole food and maybe the kibble and canned food, as far as maybe their the quality. So with kibble and canned food, there are issues with quality. They are allowed to add things to those foods that are not suitable for human consumption, whereas your fresh food diets generally have organic ingredients and food grade or human grade ingredients, so things that you would eat yourself. Kibble and canned food is basically made from stuff that is not fit for human consumption. The other difference with the fresh foods versus kibble and canned food, and actually some of the fresh foods do this as well, but with kibble and canned food, because they are heating the food or the feed to such high temperatures, it cooks out all the vitamins and minerals and proteins and nutrients, and they have to add things back in chemically. So what you'll see on a label is a whole list of chemicals. You'll have some foods that are listed, and then you'll have a list of chemicals, which means they've added back in the vitamins and minerals and nutrients with synthetic chemical forms of those nutrients. And that's a tip off that they've cooked the food beyond nutrition. So they have to add back in nutrition. But the problem with the synthetic vitamins and minerals, not only have we had problems with the quality of the synthetic blends coming from other countries that are put in our pet foods, but the synthetic vitamins and minerals lose their synergy because they're chemically made. They're not vitamins and minerals that come from the actual food or the ingredients of the diet. So they're coming from chemicals, and these are not as bioavailable to our dogs and cats as the natural forms of the vitamins and minerals. So you can have a food like a kibble food that's balanced with vitamins and minerals, but really those vitamins and minerals, because they're not bioavailable, the dog or cat cannot actually use them in proper amounts. The food is actually not balanced, if you think about it. So the synergy of whole foods and the complexity of real food matters, and it matters significantly with our pets, especially if they're prone to allergic skin problems, because that's just another way that we're adding more inflammation and less nutrition, which will make a difference in their overall quality of life. So we want to ideally reduce the inflammatory input. And the reason that skin symptoms, so your allergic skin problems, your scooting, ear infections, rashes, red skin, waxy ears, seasonal itching show up last is you've had these problems in the gut kind of smoldering along. And it's not something that is necessarily immediate unless it's a food allergy or a food sensitivity, and we'll talk about that. But when we feed inflammatory food, and there are other ways that inflammation occurs. So there are environmental things like the scented candles and the fragrances and molds in the environment. So that kind of thing can affect the skin also. But by and far, the major thing that causes inflammation, and also the major thing that we have control over, is what we feed our pets. So over time, when we're feeding inflammatory foods, which are essentially kibble and canned foods, we're slowly destroying the lining of the intestines and the stomach. And so you may see early signs. And a lot of times when I look at medical records and I'm trying to figure out, when something started and look at the progression, a lot of times what I see is these dogs and cats with allergic skin disease as adults, when they were puppies and kittens, started showing signs of problems. Maybe they started getting ear infections just kind of randomly when they were young, or maybe they vomited bile in the morning, just kind of off and on, or maybe they had a bout of diarrhea that just came out of nowhere and you couldn't figure out what caused it. And I'll see that those kind of things in medical records, and they're just treated symptomatically. They clean the ears, do some ear ointment, or they put them on metronidazole for the diarrhea, or maybe they give some Pepsid AC for the vomiting, or even just ignore it. A lot of times, it's really just ignored because some vets don't know what's causing it. But hindsight is 2020, and we look at these things and we start to see a progression of intestinal symptoms that are showing up on the skin. So you see these mild digestive problems, and they start to compound. So they start to become more frequent. And that's something that pet parents will visit their veterinarian over and over and over for the same problems, for the vomiting, for the diarrhea, for the ear infections. We just see it over and over and over, and they just keep putting Band-Aids on it. They just keep treating the symptoms and not looking deeper. So when we look deeper and we look at the gut and how we're causing inflammation in the gut, which will then change the microbiome. So the microbiome can't function properly. And the microbiome affects behavior. It affects the brain and behavior. It affects the immune system, because we talked about 70 to 80% of the immune system is in the gut. It affects the neurotransmitters, the hormones in the body. It affects so much when we destroy that microbiome with antibiotics or with inflammatory food. And then when we destroy that lining of the intestine over time, it becomes leaky. So leaky gut. And leaky gut means that food particles bigger than normal and pieces of bacteria that are from the microbiome will be able to leak through the lining of the gut and gain access to the bloodstream. And then the body overreacts to those things. And that's how they become reactive to the bacteria on the skin, because the bacteria on the skin will mirror the bacteria in the microbiome of the gut. And that's when they react to food. So when they're eating foods, the things that are eating, for example, if they're eating beef or chicken food, those proteins are what is leaking, so that they'll then develop a sensitivity to the protein or the meat that they're eating currently. So you all of a sudden see these food sensitivities, and sometimes pet parents will recognize that, and they'll recognize that maybe every time your dog has chicken or every time your cat gets beef, they flare up. And so you're noticing that sensitivity, but a lot of times it's not so obvious. And we need to do some testing to figure that out. So I will put a food sensitivity test below this video, a link to it. And it's actually a saliva test that you can run on your cat or your dog to test for what proteins, carbohydrates, vegetables, fruits, grains that they're sensitive to. And the sensitivities will show up sooner than an allergy. So it's a very sensitive test, and it can actually test for things that your pet is sensitive to before they develop a severe reaction to it. It's really interesting, and it's a saliva test that you can do at home. So I'll put a link below this video for that test, because that can help a lot. So, the bottom line is we need to figure out how to help our pets by looking at their gut. And so primarily we're going to talk about food here. We'll talk about other things because there's a lot more we can do with there are more root causes, but by and far the gut is a big one. So a lot of pet parents worry about, how do I switch their diet? And what do I give them? And should I cook the food, or should I buy the food, and what food is appropriate? So, there are recipes from reputable veterinary nutritionists. There are recipe books from people like Dr. Karen Becker, Dr. Judy Morgan. So there are reputable resources to find recipes. And there are also reputable commercial foods. So in general, you want to stay away from kibble and canned food if at all possible. You want to move to a fresh food diet, and that may be a raw diet or it may be a gently cooked. For the most part, what I find is when pets have medical issues, for example, skin allergies, a raw diet is something that would be ideal. But if they're already on something like kibble and canned and their gut is messed up, they need to transition slower than going from kibble to raw. That's a big jump, and their intestines just aren't ready for that. And sometimes their intestines are not ready to go from kibble or canned to even a gently cooked fresh food. So it can be a tough transition. So I tend to not jump from commercial kibble and canned food to a raw food diet. That's something that is ideal in the future and is fine to do in the future. But for now, a gently cooked diet is probably the way you're going to start. And you're going to transition, meaning you're going to start adding in the new food slowly, either with treats or as treats, or by mixing in maybe 25% of the new food with 75% of the old food. And over 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to gradually increase the fresh food and gradually decrease the commercial kibble and canned food. With the diets, people worry about them being balanced. And with the homemade diets, if you are using resources that are reputable and the diet is balanced, and really, we don't really know exactly the balance. I mean, this is all still being worked out, And the best way to look at it is we do need to make sure it's balanced with the knowledge we have now, but rotation of foods, rotation of diets or recipes, rotation of proteins is something that you'll want to do in the future so that the food is, or your pet's diet is balanced over time. And if you think about it, you do not eat a balanced meal every meal, and your children don't eat a balanced meal every meal. We eat balance, we get our nutritional balance over time. And same goes for animals. They get their balance over time. But the problem comes in when someone is feeding the same diet over and over and over for years. And if you're doing that, that's why the diets have to be balanced. Because a lot of people just stick with one thing and feed that forever, which is we know now not the greatest thing to do, because you can cause more food sensitivities by feeding the same thing over time. So there are ways to feed balanced diets, either over time with nutritionally balanced recipes, or nutritionally balanced commercial fresh food diets that ideally don't use synthetic vitamins. So the vitamins and minerals that make the food balanced are contained in the food. So you don't want to see that long list of chemicals in the ingredient list. All right. So the other thing that you might want to do is, if your dog or cat has a history of intestinal problems, you may want to check their microbiome. So I'll put a microbiome test below this video too. And that's a poop test, and that's something you can collect and send into the lab to determine your pet's microbiome and to see if it's balanced, if it's way off, and if there is a problem with the microbiome, how to fix it. Because the microbiome in the gut will reflect the microbiome on the skin. So the skin has normal bacteria and yeast, and so does the gut, and they're related. So checking the microbiome of the gut is important. Checking for food sensitivities is important, and that will help you determine, what because that's just perpetuating the inflammation. So the more information you have, the more you can really tailor to the diet to then balance out your pet's immune system, which will then take care of the skin problem. So that's one of the biggest areas that we see the gut disharmonies that will make a huge difference on what's happening on the skin, the ear infections, the rashes, the scooting, the redness flare-ups seasonally. Those are all related to what's going on in the gut. Okay, so that's what I wanted to go over today, and we'll talk more about other root causes and triggers for allergic skin diseases in pets, but that should give you a start on reducing the inflammation in your pet's body so that they can, the inflammation in the whole body, not just in the gut, can calm down. When you calm down the inflammation in the gut, that calms down the inflammation in the whole body, including the skin. All right. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you again.